It comes from China.
Trump's gonna you. Asian piece of
Go back to China!
You have until the day, May 23rd, 2020, to leave this country. No Asian allowed.
Open the door right now!
He said that you brought COVID-19. This is America, you thief.
Go to China, human.
Yeah.
You're not from
Go,
here,
good.
you agent.
Hey.
We miss Grandpa.
Somebody pushed me from the back and started hitting me.
How many times was he stabbed?
Five times.
No, I'm so afraid to walk the streets and do my errands.
Shot up a swamp there, they shot up 2 swamps.
Nobody is going to pay attention to us if we do not start making the noise ourselves.
We don't deserve to get it back!
There should be consequences for all this thing happening.
ABC 7 presents Stop the Hate. Protect our AAPI communities.
Good afternoon, I'm Kristen Z.
And I'm Dion Lim. We are live on ABC 7, Hulu Live, and wherever you happen to stream.
Today, instead of our usual 4 p.m. newscast, we're going to spend an hour with experts and you in conversation together about the violence against the AAPI community.
Now, the physical attacks against the AAPI community, those are on the rise. And it's more than just a story to me, to my colleagues. This is personal, but it's definitely not new. Consider it the Bay Area's dirty little secret. A few years ago, a friend of mine sent me a message asking if I could help a neighbor who had heard there was a grandma beaten and left for dead at a playground in San Francisco. I remember very vividly that accompanying the message was a photo of a tiny grandma. She was crumpled there up on the ground, and I stared at it for a very long time thinking, oh my God, this looks exactly like my own grandma. A law enforcement official told me that these attacks weren't anything new, that they had been happening for decades, and even went so far as to call them the Bay Area's dirty little secret, but that Asian Americans wouldn't report these crimes because they didn't feel like they would be heard, that no one would pay attention or even care. The story that really changed everything for me was the older Asian man out collecting empty cans to make a few extra dollars for his family in San Francisco when he was so brutally attacked, and it was all caught on camera, but not just physically, but by racial slurs. And he was humiliated, reduced to tears. And I remember so vividly watching that video over and over again on a loop and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, he looks just like my own father. I was so hesitant to share this on social media because I didn't know how the public would respond to it. But what happened was that the floodgates just opened. That video of that man's pain and suffering hit a nerve, and people then started telling me their own stories. By telling me via direct message, they felt like there was someone on their side who understood. It was a hell of a lot less scary than filing a police report. You know, the stories really spanned from witnessing the word chink spray painted on the sidewalk to acts of aggression, like the family who was on a hike and were told to go back to where they came from by a white former HR executive of a major Bay Area company. With each story, Asian Americans became more bold, and as I was getting tipped off more and more, the stories of hate became violent, and it was terrifying. After sharing their stories with me, life changed dramatically, almost always for the better. The young woman who was pistol whipped outside her home and had her car stolen, after sharing her story, so many viewers raised money for her. She has more than enough now to buy a brand new car. The gas station owner who was pepper sprayed and told to go back to China by a customer, his perpetrator was arrested days later, and attention brought in new patrons who then stopped by to offer words of support and purchase gas. That woman whose grandmother was beaten up on the playground, she felt empowered enough to start an organization to help other people who've been attacked. When victims and the community see the results, their willingness and trust to share their stories snowballs into something incredible. Since the reporting of these stories, there have been endless offers to help. The contractor who raised money to then pass out air horns to the most vulnerable seniors and community members. A Latino man who volunteered to chaperone seniors as they did their daily errands. We are doing this together, and through the power of social media, the love of children, their grandchildren, all of us can have a stronger voice and truly make change in this world. Clearly, I am having an emotional response to that because I have lived these victims' pain for the past year and a half. I did not expect to feel this way watching that story. But it is also giving me hope that today is happening, that we are having this very special town hall discussion, and we are letting those voices be heard right now.
Indeed, turning pain into action. We have gathered today a group of people to discuss both the problem and possible solutions and look at what you can do, whether you're part of the community or an ally.
Yeah, we are so proud to introduce our panelists today. Joining us, Tammy Cho, co-founder of Hate is a Virus, Chris Sung, Chief of Police with the Mountain View Police Department.
Psychotherapist Tsukui Ina, she's also Professor Emeritus from Cal State Sacramento. Russell Jung, San Francisco State University professor and co-founder of StopAAPIHate.org.
We also have Sakone Lasafangtong with the Community Ambassador Program in Oakland and Director of Housing with Family Bridges, and Shaosan Liu, Executive Director with the Chinese Progressive Association.
We want to start with the big picture. Russell, I'm going to start with you because there are a lot of Asian Americans asking me, look, is it really open season on us right now? Is it really not safe for us? Or does it just feel that way? You've been tracking the numbers, so give us the big picture of what is actually happening.
Well, the big picture is since last year, Stop AAPI Hate at least has received over 6,600 incidents of racism reported nationwide from Asian Americans. And it really is horrific, the stories we're receiving. They're traumatizing. People are getting attacked and having profanities and racial slurs slung at them. Another study, the Pew Research Center said last year, 45% of Asian Americans experienced racism directly. So that's, over 10 million cases of racism. So it is widespread, it's institutionalized in policies, and it's historic. So this isn't new. This is just another recurrence of anti-Asian violence that we've had to go through time and time again.
Yeah, and I certainly referenced this earlier on in the program that a law enforcement official referred to it as the Bay Area's dirty little secret. This has been going on for decades. So I do want to bring in right now Chief Chris with the Mountain View Police Department. Thank you so much for joining us. Clearly, underreporting is a problem. It continues to be. Can you give us an idea of why that is happening? Why are more people not coming forward and exemplifying what people should be doing after crimes like this?
Sure, and I think I can answer that from wearing two different hats. One, as a police chief, we always want to encourage people to come forward and report anything, anytime they're a victim of a crime. But I also wear the hat as a first-generation son of immigrants, and I understand growing up in a Chinese culture, the nuances of, don't be a bother to other people, don't cause trouble, don't bring shame or lose face. So I understand that, and that's the challenge, especially for law enforcement, is to reach across and bridge that gap. And I think, a lot of ways, with a lot of the diversity that's shown in the police departments here in the Bay Area, we do have a lot of departments that have officers that speak the native language of many of the AAPI communities that are represented here. And I think just that alone can help maybe bring a little bit of comfort and approaching law enforcement. And I would encourage, the AAPI community to get to know their department in the jurisdictions that they live in and find those officers because they are out there.
Chief Chris, you speaking Mandarin, I know you've been able to hold town halls and speak directly to people and convince them and really get them to work with the police and trust you and build that communication. But I want to ask you, sometimes you think there's safety in numbers, and Mountain View has such a big Asian American population. You think, are we safe here? But even in your city, even with you as chief, you've had some recent racial attacks.
We have, and that's difficult. And and walking downtown and talking to many of the shop owners, I do get the sense that they do experience some of these instances. Maybe it's not a straight up assault. A lot of times it's comments that are made to them. And I sense what I kind of brought up earlier is that hesitancy to not want to just cause trouble. But, you know, I think our involvement with law enforcement is one part of a giant wheel, so to speak. Law enforcement, the DA's office, investigating these crimes is one spoke. And I think there's so many aspects, especially with all the different guests represented here today, that represent a holistic approach to our path forward and how we address and solve this issue of AAPI hate, as well as working together to ensure that all the communities, especially here in the Bay Area, people feel safe innately when they go outside. I would hope that we can do whatever we can to encourage that.
Yeah, and to Professor Jung, I know you have spearheaded this Stop AAPI Hate Reporting Center and really started documenting these instances of hate. The numbers obviously are shocking to people who are not necessarily familiar with what has been going on. Do you think, because I hear this oftentimes from community members, do you think that the instances of violence, of these attacks, are those increasing, or is it people are becoming more aware and understanding the importance of sharing their story?
No, I think it's both and. I think we have the trend of racism that was really fomented by President Trump last year with his rhetoric because of the fear of the pandemic. So we had spates of an instance of hate. They're not all hate crimes. They're just people harassing us, cyberbullying. And then you had the longstanding trend of violence against Asian Americans in low-income communities. That's always been there. I live in Oakland. Pretty much everybody in our neighborhood become victims of crime, and we have to really get at the roots of crime in under-resourced neighborhoods. So there's two trends. They're often conflated. They are related, but they're conflated so that people think, oh, what's happening to our grandparents is part of this overall racism against Asian Americans. And it could be, but so I think you have these two trends. They are both surging because of the pandemic and because of the economic conditions. And also, because we're getting more attention now, finally, people know more about Stop AAPI Hate and they're reporting more. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Chief Shung said we don't have a history of reporting. That's not necessarily true. We have a lot of elders reporting on our site. We have a lot of low non-English speakers reporting on our site. And so I think maybe the difference is that they really feel like we're trusted community partners who are not necessarily law enforcement. A lot of times our respondents don't necessarily want individual action, but they want to develop a community voice. They want it to stop. They want to, you know, change policies. So I think we are getting reporting, and it is from marginalized populations, limited English-speaking people.
I think sometimes there is the tendency where people don't want to report if they think it won't result in any concrete action. And Chief Chris, I'm going to bring you back in because I know that you have worked with the DA in your community in Santa Clara County to make sure that such attacks are prosecuted as hate crimes, right? Have you had some recent examples of that? And tell us what exactly qualifies legally as a hate crime.
Sure, and I think that's the key ingredient here is when you have a jurisdiction and a DA's office that works in concert towards the same goal. I know I can speak for the law enforcement agencies in Santa Clara County. We are all united in a proactive stance on hate crimes, and I believe that's true for the greater part of the Bay Area. I think for hate crimes, what's difficult for a lot of times is when we innately may feel or know that a crime is a hate crime, proving it in the court of law is a different story. And that's where it falls on law enforcement to really ask those extra questions about when we catch the bad guy, you know, to dive deep into the motive of the attack, because that's information that the DA is going to need to convince a jury down the road that these are not just an attack on a person, say it's an assault or a battery, but that there's a hate crime element to it. So just by virtue of the victim being a minority does not in and of itself qualify as a hate crime. We need to be able to prove the motive. And I know, speaking at least for our department, we have a proactive policy on investigating these things. So the officers are trained to ask those extra questions to make sure that we don't just classify it as a simple assault when the root cause of it could have been a hate crime.
Yeah, that clarification is so important. I hear from so many in the community who say they're concerned, why is this not in a certain categorization? All right, certainly much more to discuss ahead, including messages from people in the AAPI community direct to you.
And we want you to join in the conversation. You are part of this ABC7 Listens Bay Area conversation as well. Go to Facebook or YouTube to weigh in now and interact with the panel of guests today.
To tell your story, your family's immigration, their American experience. And through this, I think, is where we can find understanding about each other's stories and to really come together and live out the American dream together.
In the next. Hi, everybody on Facebook Live. Thanks for watching our town hall today. Kristen Z and Dion Lim here with you to moderate this conversation with our panel of experts. I want to fold in some comments here from our viewers. So glad you're chiming in here on Facebook. Billy Wynn says using an Asian slur and Asian joke is a dangerous language, and this has to stop because language does matter and words do matter. Tammy Cho, if you're with us, you're the co-founder of Hate is a Virus, and you, of all people, are really monitoring what is being said on social media and how those words do matter, whether they're negative or positive. Do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. I do second that words absolutely matter. I think we've seen some of the effects of it last year when we saw the incidents spike due to some of the rhetoric that was being used around COVID-19. And that's something we're being very mindful of. There are really incredible workshops and resources being built out both by our organization, but also other organizations like Hollaback and Asian Americans Advancing Justice that help you actually respond to some of these comments as well.
When we come back on air, I definitely want to explore some of Hollaback's techniques, the 5Ds, because I think they're so practical and it's easy to remember. And really, you need it to be kind of user-friendly and easy for people to actually be able to employ it during a high-pressure situation, right? Dion, you have a question?
Yeah, you know what? I think, Tammy, you and I can talk a little bit more, once we come out of commercial break. But first off, I have to say, wow, what a year it's been when we first started talking to each other, and I feel like I see you in every panel, about stopping AAPI hate. I really want to talk about how the strides that have been made, where all the money is going. I get questions about that a lot. When people donate or when people, purchase a T-shirt that says "Hate is a Virus," what does that directly go to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of our proceeds for the shirts, as well as all the crowdfunding campaigns that have happened, go back to Hate is a Virus and our Community Action Fund. And so what that means is that for the Community Action Fund, that's our effort to raise $1 million to give grants back to different local and national API organizations, because one of our biggest learnings and conversations that we've been having is how underfunded these community-based organizations are, despite the importance of their work. Less than 0.2% of national funding goes to these organizations. And so we wanted to create change in that aspect. And so we give out grants on a monthly basis. You can follow our social media channels for updates on all the grantees. We've already made over dozens of grants so far.
Oh my God, 0.2, is that what you said? 0.2%?
2%. Mm-hmm.
Wow, long way to go. You know what? You're making a great dent in that. I remember, when you got picked up by a mainstream retailer for your products and really getting it into the hands of young people. That was very exciting. We have only about 20 seconds left. I do want to remind everyone, please let us know where you're tuning in from. We always love to hear your perspectives, questions, or even comments during this past year and a half. It certainly has been a trying one for all of us. So stay tuned. We will be back on the air in just a second.
He called me Chinese virus.
How many times was he stabbed?
Five times. It was two guys coming at me both with guns.
I'm sick and tired and angry of what's happening to my community.
A lot of times when we hear about these hate incidents and hate crimes being committed, a lot of times people standing around have done practically nothing or don't know what they're supposed to do.
We need the people that are creating these acts of violence prosecuted, and we need to see justice.
according to a study out this month from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at CSU San Bernardino, reported hate crimes against Asians in the nation's largest cities are up 164% over the past year. New York City saw the largest increase, followed by San Francisco, which saw a 140% increase.
Yeah, if I can take a moment to just say in San Leandro, there was a story out just this week saying that attacks on Asian Americans up almost 300% from 2019 to 2020. And then there's this, a report out from the Stop AAPI Hate Center out earlier this month found that the number of anti-Asian hate incidents surged more than 3,700 to 6,600 in March. Now, the majority were verbal harassment and shunning, followed by physical assaults. Those were up 64%. Wow, with numbers like that, I want to talk really quickly to Sakone Lasafangtong, the Director of Housing of Family Bridges, because for you, you're very open in talking about your background. You were incarcerated for 20 years. You had gotten into so many arguments. You had been harassed and robbed decades ago. Talk about that experience, how you responded then, and how you are choosing to respond now to be effective.
Yeah, you know, with all that's going on, it triggers me, you know, it's like a history repeating itself, you know, back in the days of Yellow Peril and the internment camps. And when I'm a refugee from Laos, I grew up here in Sacramento, and you know, when I arrived here as a refugee, I was already at a disadvantage. You know, I was put in a poor community where there's drug, gang, violence every day that's happening. And the role models that I see around me, people that are older than I am, are all either gang members, drug dealers, people that commit crime for a living. I never see anything beyond that. I never see myself as a police officer, a lawyer, attorney, a doctor. Every day I wake up is that I got to be just as tough as anybody in my environment so that I could survive. Because it seems like growing up, now that I reflect back, it seems like when I grew up, it seems like I was put in this community and was pitted against, you know, like the Mexicans, the blacks, other folks that's not Asian, and we're refugees, so we're not the majority, we're the minority, and we're small, and we always get picked on, you know. So back then we fight violence with violence. We don't back down. You know, we were taught to protect our elders, to respect and love our elders. So if one of us get picked on, we all help each other. We come together as refugees, and we fight violence against violence. My experience in prison, you know, it led me to 20 years of incarceration with that kind of mentality. And in prison, that's where I learned that violence is not always the way to solve things. There's a program in Solano, and I like to give a shout out to Ms. Chu and her OMCP program. I was taught coping skills. You know, I was taught de-escalation skills. I was taught how to deal with my hurt and my pain instead of taking it out on other people. And this is something that is much needed in school. You know, this is something that needs to be invested in more. Is something that's going to teach, you know, the kids, the children's, and other people how to deal with their hurts and their pain. Is provide them with coping skills so that they know how to utilize it. So now, you know, coming after 20 years of incarceration, coming out here in 2018, everything is different. I know that I could never break the law again. I could never use violence to solve my problem and issue. So every skills and coping skills that I learned, I utilize that now by using it in the community that I work for, which is Oakland Chinatown. There's a lot of folks that have homeless folks that have mental health issues, and that's another area where more resources and money needs to be invested in, because a lot of times that crimes that happen in Oakland Chinatown is not hate crime, it's just crime. Because in Chinatown, there's a lot of Asian there. And when you know, folks with mental health issue come there and have their episodes, and those are the people that gets harmed or in the way. And with these skills that I learned, you know, I utilize that to calm folks down. One of these skills is
Sakone, if I may, I totally want to talk more about the Community Ambassador Program in just a little bit, but I think you raise a really important point about the economic struggles that you and many Asian Americans face. I want to bring in Shasan, Chinese Progressive Association, because that is a point that is often lost, which is due to the model minority myth. There can be the misperception that all Asian Americans, or many, are doing very well. We don't face any economic struggles or housing shortages, or we don't face discrimination or racism. But what is the actual reality? And talk about why, you know, that perception is actually hurting us.
Thank you so much for the question. Yes, my name is Shasan. I'm with the Chinese Progressive Association. And, you know, our members really are facing so many crises on top of crisis. You know, for the last 50 years, our organization has worked to, you know, win more political voice and improvements in the lives of our Chinese immigrant community members, who, as you said, it's often imagined that Asian Americans are driving Mercedes and all doing very well, when the reality could be nothing further from the truth. In San Francisco, 35% of the population is Asian, but we are 42% of the households living in poverty. And in Chinatown, you know, we have so many of our workers, restaurant workers, service workers, you know, seniors living in single room occupancy hotels where you have and often entire families living in a 70 square foot space with a shared bathroom and kitchen with 6 other families. And that's, think about going through COVID and trying to socially distance in those kinds of conditions. We know that the under-resourcing that the Chinese immigrant community has seen and has experienced, and the low wage and the lack of access to good jobs, is something that is not only experienced in the Chinese community, but is part of what is the instability in our region that allows for these sorts of violence to proliferate. You know, the Bay Area is such an affluent region, and yet we are also extremely unequal. For our members, Chinese immigrant working families, they are feeling so vulnerable right now. They're feeling so afraid because on top of not having a good job, on top of living in substandard, overcrowded housing, on top of, you know, not being able to access culturally competent mental health care, they have to worry about stepping out the front door. It's heartbreaking to hear, you know, our community members talk about how they won't let grandma out of the house, how they are afraid to go to work, to commute to work, how parents don't even want to go pick up the meals that the school is distributing for their children because they're afraid to, you know, go 6 blocks away from where they live. That is the reality our community is facing, and that is why we need immediate action and investments in programs like what Sakone is doing in Oakland, the Community Ambassador Program. Our communities actually know how to take care of ourselves. Like Sakone said, you know, we have. It is not new, racism is not new, and neither is us taking care of each other and finding solutions together to our problems. CPA has been around for 50 years doing this work to fight for workers' rights, housing access, education, healthcare, and this is the kind of work that needs to continue if we're going to really address the roots of this issue, because racism is not just in the acts of violence, as terrifying and despicable as those are, and as much as we need to take immediate serious action to address those incidents, it's much more than just that. And we need to really have a comprehensive long-term solution that's grounded in the wisdom of our communities who have, you know, for decades been taking care of our problems together. And I just want to say that it's really important that we have a unified approach to this, because we are not the only communities of color facing racism. We are not the first community nor the last to experience racist violence. That's actually the foundations of this country. And we know that we have a lot to gain by partnering with other communities of color who have faced these types of issues, and together to demand the investments we need. We need massive reinvestments in our communities for good jobs, for housing, for healthcare and mental health care. These are some of the things that we need if we're going to seriously address and stop AAPI hate.
Shawsan, I'm glad that you mentioned unity and all of those possible solutions. That obviously is going to take time, but in the meantime, I do want to bring in Dr. Ina, because you too talk about unity. And earlier we heard from Sakone talking about the coping mechanisms, the skills. I myself also shed some tears being triggered by watching all of those videos from stories I've reported on in the past year and a half. Can you speak about the secondary trauma, the different types of trauma, how we can best deal with the stress so that we can be better equipped to move forward and make those solutions reality?
Yes, sure. Thank you for the question. So trauma is, an experience that overwhelms the person's capacity to cope. And when there's community trauma, collective trauma, which most communities of color have suffered for decades and generations, that fear is passed on from generation to generation. And what's happening right now brings into the forefront things that have been repeated over time. So I was born in the World War II prison camps for Japanese Americans. And one of the things and I've interviewed many people who suffered that consequence of institutionalized racism, was the absence of any protest, that nobody spoke up when people were disappearing from their homes and their schools and their classrooms. And so today, I think the unity is really important, that people are, organizations are, even corporate organizations are speaking out, which I think is really important. So trauma leads to isolation, and people who are afraid living, the consequences mental health wise is depression and anxiety. So when people decide they're going to stay inside and not go out, it worsens the situation. So safety is what we need. So we need safety within our family. We have to talk to other people about what we're feeling and what's going on. And then we need to organize safety in the community and in the institutions. And as Shawsan was saying, we don't have enough culturally competent mental health professionals in the field. So long-term, some of these things need to be addressed in ways that we haven't really done to meet the crisis that's happening today. So, I'm encouraging people to reach out and talk to each other, whether it's other family members, but also neighbors. I had a very wonderful experience when my white neighbor next door came over to my house and said, because I'm a target. I'm Asian, I'm small, I'm old. And she came over and she said, if you're going to go shopping, just call me, I'll go with you. And that felt comforting, some sense of personal safety, that there was somebody who was looking out. And how, if we talk to our neighbors, that we can step outside our door and know that others may be watching and would respond with help. But if we stay isolated and secluded, the problems can become worse. The mental health issues, people begin to cope by drinking and using drugs and watching news all the time, which then has long-term consequences for our mental health.
Dr. Ina, I'm so glad you shared that story, because during this period, sometimes something as simple as asking, hey, are you okay, from one of your colleagues is enough to make you keep going and feel like you can keep pushing, giving you that strength. We are taking a quick break on the air, but the conversation continues right now on Facebook and YouTube. Please continue to stay with us and ask us your questions.
That's right. We want you to join in the conversation. You are part of this ABC7 Listens Bay Area conversation as well. I see some of you on Facebook Live here weighing in, and YouTube. You can go there as well and interact with the panel of guests today. We'll be right back.
I do also want to remind everyone that on Monday, the White House and the Walt Disney Company are co-hosting a panel discussion on diversity in Hollywood and AAPI representation behind the scenes. I'm going to be moderating that panel, which includes author Kevin Kwan and writer-director Jessica Yu, just to name a few. You can watch it all Monday at 11 a.m. and participate yourself just live on the ABC News apps or wherever you happen to stream.
I think by having all the people who identify with that group stand up, that we help our brothers and sisters who are being more targeted.
allyship comes in many different forms, but for me, it's just knowing that there's the support of friends, family, colleagues, knowing that we are like-minded, that we are not okay with what's going on, and that we will hold space for one another.
E4 starts with hi, everybody. Thanks for watching us here on this town hall, Stopping AAPI Hate and Finding Allyship. I want to fold in some viewer questions here and comments. John Lee says, it's like we don't belong here, even though we're born here. Like one time a neighbor called a cop on me while I was sitting in my car. I was warming up my car, then I noticed a cop car and the white guy watching me like I was a thief. I think that brings up this commonality, right, that people of color often experience, where when you're in a different group, you might think your experiences are so different that the other cannot relate. But oftentimes, if you look hard enough, you can see that some of the tensions are created due to kind of everybody fighting for scraps, and that you actually have more in common. I wonder who would like to take that up. Russell or Shasan, do you have some thoughts on that? Hi, everybody. Thanks for
Absolutely. I think that is exactly the problem we have. The blinders that any of us had, any illusion we had that racism and white supremacy was no longer a problem in this country, I think we're pretty fully removed in the past few years. And I think what we've seen in what's happening is that, the particular impact on Asian Americans and surfacing that understanding, it's almost like each community of color is getting our turn to be in the center, to see just how bad it is and how deep white supremacy and racism are rooted in this country. When we hear these stories of trauma and pain, I think about our friends and neighbors and family members who are from different racial groups who are experiencing those traumas when they see videos of police killings, when they hear about families being torn apart at the border, when they see what's happening in our communities with the kind of racial attacks on Asians, that these are all connected, and they're connected to a system that is deeply unequal. This country has another virus, and that's the economic inequality virus, where even just in this pandemic, we've seen that corporations are profiting by billions and billions of dollars in a time when millions are out of work. And there's something seriously wrong with the world's richest country having so much trouble being able to just distribute vaccines, right? And address this public health crisis, because there has been decades of underinvestment in our public infrastructure, in public health, in public education, and decades of underinvestment in communities of color. And that's why it is so important for us to come together as communities of color and all people of conscience, right? To really address racism and to remember that this is not new, the racism, but neither is us coming together. Racism is old as this country, and so is the solidarity of communities coming together to fight for justice for all people.
That's a great point to end on. We'll take 5 more seconds. We'll come back on air and continue the conversation then.
You're watching Stop the Hate, Protect Our AAPI Communities.
You don't have to be a victim of a hate crime to feel enraged. Like, if you were able to just sit down and really try to empathize with people, just try to go through your head how someone would feel. If just imagine someone did something like that to you, like just came up to you and insulted you just based on your race for a fraction of a second, and you feel that rage for you forever,
Yeah, a little empathy certainly goes a long way. We are back with our ABC7 Listens conversation, Stop the Hate, Protect Our AAPI Communities. I want to get to Tammy Cho, co-founder of Hate is a Virus, because Tammy is an incredibly accomplished young woman. And the meaning of representation, you and I have spoken about this on Clubhouse, but you were the first AAPI woman in oftentimes a tech environment, being at the helm of different apps and movements. You know, I myself, the first Asian American woman to be at the helm of a primary newscast in 3 different cities. There's one thing to do with representation, but then what you do with it, I think, is so important as well. What is your message to everyone that you have been trying to push when it comes to actually using that representation for good?
Yeah, John, thank you so much for that question. And it's an honor to be able to continue to be in conversation with you over this past year, just addressing these issues. You know, I think representation, it's so important for us to be able to give a platform to those that are most marginalized in our communities, and understanding that it's really important that the people that are closest to the problems are also closer to the solution. And so something that I am actively doing each day is really figuring out and finding ways to lean into community and hearing the stories of our community members, you know, learning from other community organizers like those that are sharing this panel with me today, who have been doing the groundwork for so many years, and really passing the mic to them to be able to share with us what potential solutions we need to do and what type of action steps we need to take from here.
You know, a lot of people want to help. Sometimes they just don't know how. Real quickly, first Tammy and then Chief Chris, if you could tell us what bystanders could do, because it does take bystanders. When you're the victim, you need someone to step up. Tammy, if you can quickly, in a minute, go through the 5 Ds. You partner with Hollaback, which devised this to help people.
Absolutely. So there's this incredible training that Hollaback and Asian Americans Advancing Justice put together about bystander intervention. And they have this framework called the 5 Ds. The first is to distract, like my puppy is barking in the background, creating a distraction to de-escalate the situation. And that could be anything from, you know, dropping your coffee or dropping a snacks that you're eating, to show that to redirect their attention. The second is to really delegate. So it's finding somebody else, whether it's a person of authority or even somebody that's next to you, to help deal with this situation if it feels safe. The third is to document the incident. So continuing to find ways of, whether it's through your phone or through social media, being able to document what's happening. And we've really seen the impacts of that over this past year, especially. Fourth is delay. So ask the person, you know, if they are okay afterwards, whoever was affected, and show that you're there to support them. And 5 is direct. So directly, if you do feel safe, directly intervene in the situation.
All right, thank you. And Chief Chris, what is the advice you give to people, the small business owners who might be afraid, and then the bystanders who might be in a position to help them?
I love those 5 Ds, and I probably will want to reach out to Tammy offline to try to see how our department can at least partner and maybe expand on that training, at least for our community. But I think we're all familiar with the phrase, you know, it takes a village, right? And this issue will take a village. The police cannot be everywhere at once, but it's so powerful. I do know of instances where, because a bystander stepped in and then distracted and called out, of instances being broken up. And I think a lot of times for these shop owners or the community members to know that there are people out there in our communities who are willing to just really intervene. And to Dr. Ina's point, you know, I think a lot of times as a society, we've kind of lost touch with each other, right? The pandemic has forced us into our homes. We very often may not know our neighbor 3 or 4 doors down. It's terrible, but it's also a huge opportunity as we begin to open up now, is to reconnect all those elements of society where, you know, now is a time to get to know people that don't look like each other, get to know people that are outside of our comfort zones. And, you know, more often than not, I think we'll all find that as humans, we have a lot more in common than we do apart. So, you know, I would encourage people really to, you know, get off their phones, get off their devices, and really just meet people and help each other as a village, as a community. A lot of incredible things can happen. And actually, if there's a silver lining to this pandemic, we're perfectly suited to take advantage of that opportunity now.
Yeah, Chief, I love the fact that look at the unity that's happening between you and Tammy, hopefully in the future partnering up together, and also looking inwards too. Sakone, before I get to our next panelist, I just have to say, looking inward, I, even as an Asian American, a Chinese American, just assumed that your last name, because it was very long, was Thai, but for you to tell me and give me some education that you are Laotian, you know, gives me a better understanding just by doing something so simple. And that goes along with what I want to ask you, Shaw-san. You know, we had those visuals showing the events that the Progressive Association has organized in recent months. For example, one gathering after the Atlanta spa shootings. How can people show that solidarity with the AAPI community without having to necessarily attend a large community event or march, having to beat their chest? There are small things, something that people can exercise in every day.
Yeah, we don't do too much chest beating these days, but really it's about, I totally agree that everyone has different ways that they want to contribute and connect to this. And I think starting with listen, you know, for folks who are, whether you are Asian or not, listen to other people in your community. The Asian diaspora is the Asian Pacific Island diaspora is a huge, diverse conglomerate of people with different histories and homelands and stories and lived realities in this country. And just like you wouldn't want anyone to assume anything about you, we shouldn't assume anything about each other. And so this is just an opportunity, the invitation, along with the crisis, there's an invitation, right, to actually listen to each other, learn each other's stories, and learn our stories that are not just of pain and suffering, which there's plenty of in a racist society that we live in. There's also stories of resilience, stories of power, and stories of coming together that have to be uncovered and retold, because we're not often taught that in school, which is why, you know, education and investment in ethnic studies is so important. And so I think listening and learning from each other, and then finding what are the ways that make you feel, you know, that feel comfortable to you to take one step towards acting on that, right? Whether it's sharing information with friends and family, or as has been mentioned, you know, getting to know your neighbors. I mean, I love all these examples of just, it's about the basic humanity of seeing each other's humanity, which is what racism takes away from us. It takes away our ability to see each other's humanity. And it's what an unequal economic system does to us, is it turns us into, you know, where we're competing for crumbs, as you said earlier, right? Rather than seeing how we can work together to demand that, hey, why should 1% of our population get all the good stuff and we have to fight over this little bit? Maybe we should be a little bit more equal, right? And some examples I just want to share is that I think oftentimes it's untold, the stories of how Asian Americans have organized together to improve our lives and improve our communities' lives. And there's such a rich history of that. And just recently in San Francisco, you know, I want to share about how our youth, you know, our youth participants, our members, got together and said, you know what, we have anxiety, we have depression, we have all kinds of mental health issues. We have so much pressure because our parents work all the time. We have a ton of pressure to succeed academically, and nobody thinks that we need help. Same issue, racism, minority myth, right? They got together, they surveyed nearly 1,000 high school students in San Francisco, and they came up with a series of solutions from the youth themselves of how they could improve the mental health of young people, including they were able to win $1.25 million in funding for increasing counseling and services, and to make sure that the youth actually were included in decision-making and having a voice in what kind of wellness services would best suit their needs. And this is really talking about not just Asian youth, but it was Chinese immigrant youth leading a campaign that benefited students of color across the district. And that's an example of how us coming together and, you know, naming our needs and then standing in solidarity can win real improvements for all of our communities.
Empowerment.
And those services make us safer. Those services make us safer. I want to point out that so many of these incidents we were hearing about, we are hearing that the people who are suspects in these cases have mental illness or mental health challenges or not housed. That tells you that there's other issues we have to be dealing with, you know, in order to get to the root of the problem.
I want to turn to Dr. Ina, because not only are you a psychotherapist, you are also the co-founder of Tsuru for Solidarity, which is a Japanese-American social justice advocacy group related to World War II. So I want to ask you, when you have this constant experience of being others, being treated as a foreigner in your own country, somehow you don't belong, what is the psychological impact of that? What kind of a toll does it take?
It's a big question. But one of the dangers, of course, is that we internalize the oppressive messages that we get, and it impacts how we view ourselves and what we deserve and what we have a right to speak out about. One of the things that we found really helpful in working with Sudu for Solidarity, which is organizing these healing circles. And we're in the process right now. We have met with community leaders in Oakland, Chinatown, and we did a healing circle where mostly what we do is we sit together and we share our stories and listen to the strengths and the vulnerabilities that we've all suffered. And it's created a bond. And our next step is then to invite in leaders from the Black community to share in a healing circle so we can talk about the issues, the tension between our communities. And these are the kind of conversations that very difficult to have in therapy, in one-to-one sessions, because I think the healing that is needed is the healing of our community, which means that we're together in collective consciousness to support and repair the damage. That includes the internalizing of the negative stereotypes. It makes us wary and hypervigilant and paranoid, in addition to just trying to survive. So when we're in community, I think this is where we gather our strength. So I'm hoping that people will begin to do things like that in their own neighborhoods. You don't have to be a professional to gather people together to sit and listen to each other's stories.
Yeah, and we hope that certainly as well. We do want to take a quick break on air, but that conversation continues right now on Facebook and YouTube.
Part of building a better Bay Area is fighting for racial and social justice. While we don't have all the answers, we have a lot of vetted local resources. To find out more about how you can take action and be an ally, go to abc7news.com/takeaction. All right, thank you for watching us here on Facebook Live and on YouTube. Glad you've stuck with us for this amazing conversation. Thanks to our expert panelists. Sakone, I'd like to take this time to ask you to tell us more about the Community Ambassador Program. You've done a lot of leading and training volunteer patrols to get out there, not only to make sure people feel safe and protected, but also de-escalation. Share some of that work with our audience.
Well, yeah, I love what was said about getting community together and building unity. APIN has been organizing volunteers to come and help sweep the street and clean up the neighborhood, and at the same time made themselves visible for folks that need help. They could approach any of the folks that are in the vests for help. So there were like a bunch of rallies we had over at Madison, and it brought a lot of people together. It filled up the whole park, and I've seen people from all walks of life come together, and seeing that gives me hope. So we try to encourage everyone to come together like that and keep an eye out for our community members. And we always encourage folks to report, because one thing I learned from the safety training from Officer May, she's the liaison to the Oakland Chinatown, is that if more people will report crimes that are happening, even small things, then she could put the word out to other officers to let them know that, hey, in this area right here, this is what's been going on, so pay more attention there. And if more people report, you never know, you could be saving somebody's life, because if you don't report those little things, the people that are doing it will gain confidence and do harsher things. It could be a simple something verbal to something physical that quick when they feel that nobody is reporting it. So please, we always encourage folks to come out, report. If you see a crime happening, 911. Just 911, unless you know the individual, then you can intervene. And like Tammy said, with the distraction, you see a crime happening, you can say, hey, the police are on their way, even though you didn't call the police yet.
Yeah, Sakone, real quickly, we only have about 30 seconds. I know you're a member of Asians with Attitudes, one of the online movements. Instagram is a way that people have been able to, quote unquote, report, maybe not to law enforcement, but with their community. Talk about the importance also of the power of social media during this time.
Yeah, that's one way where we get a lot of support from is, encouraging folks on social media to come together, to stand up, to speak out, and so that we could be heard that it's not fair for us Asian Americans to live in fear, in constant worry and fear. We all have the right to be who we are and not be afraid to be attacked because of who we are.
Yeah, and sometimes easier to do on social media than necessarily traditionally. All right, Sakone, we'll be right back.
I think that there are a lot of blended, multiracial, interracial families, and I think that the more that we see these types of people and we see these types of families and you understand and learn from their cultures and are willing to keep an open mind and listen, I think that is going to help bring about change.
We want to thank our panel of experts for taking the time out of their busy schedules today to talk with us and with you about stopping hate and ending violence against the AAPI community.
Yeah, big thank you to Tammy Cho, co-founder of Hate is a Virus, Chief Chris Shung with the Mountain View Police Department as well.
Also psychotherapist Satsuki Ina and Russell Jung, co-founder of StopAAPIHate.org.
And Sakone Lasafangtong with the Community Ambassador Program in Oakland, and Sha-San Liu with the Chinese Progressive Association. Our deepest appreciation to all of you.
The recent violence and vitriol against Asian Americans have hit such a collective nerve because they brought to the surface our long repressed pain, the pain of being treated like a foreigner in our own country. I remember one time in high school, I answered a question incorrectly. The teacher said to the whole class, "Looks like Miss Z had too much rice wine." Everyone laughed. I felt embarrassed and ashamed, yet I smiled. That felt like the socially acceptable thing to do. Many Asian Americans know what I'm talking about, the exhaustion of signaling outwardly that we're not bothered by those slights, big or small, when inwardly we're screaming. But now, pushed to the limit, sometimes literally, we are speaking up, louder and more insistent than ever before. And we will keep speaking up until we are heard. And we have allies who are mobilizing with us because we are Americans. And we belong.
Yeah, we are certainly not doing this alone. Okay, I'm going to try and get through this without tearing up. You know, I woke up this morning like I do most mornings nowadays. I have a sinking feeling in my stomach. It is how many videos, how many stories of elderly Asian Americans being attacked will I be alerted to today? And today, this is a true story, the answer was 5. All of them before 10 o'clock in the morning. As I sifted through the details of each, including a lead about a 77-year-old woman who was ambushed from behind, thrown to the ground and robbed, I asked myself the question I ask daily now. Why do I keep doing this? How long does this burden of being the keeper and the storyteller of these horrific crimes last? But the fact you are watching this very program, engaging in what is happening, I know we are making progress. It is something that motivates me to keep on going, even when there are times when I want to break down in tears like right now or give up entirely. This burden is becoming lighter with every person, Asian American, Pacific Islander or not, consciously engaging and working toward change. That is a blessing, and those are my final words.
If you missed some of today's conversation, you can watch it again on our connected TV apps on Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, and Android TV. Search ABC7 Bay Area to download it now.
And you can watch the full episode of Our America, Asian Voices, tomorrow at 8 p.m. right here on ABC7. You can also find it on our ABC7 Bay Area Connected TV app wherever you stream. Thanks so much for joining us for this special edition of ABC7 News at 4. I'm Dion Lim.
And I'm Kristen Z. ABC7 News at 5 is next.